a way to go in winning the trust and confidence of the general public, and particularly of women and of minorities. I'm very fortunate today to have two great women joining me on the stage. Can I introduce to you Figen Murray? And Figen, if you would come and join me, please, and take a seat on the stage. Figen Murray is a great campaigner. She lost her son, Martyn, in the arena bombing, and she has been campaigning for mandatory security in venues, in entertainment venues and the like, and that goes under the heading of Martyn's Law. Please welcome Figen Murray. And my other guest is Gina Miller. Gina Miller has been an incredible voice on the importance of democracy, and as a campaigner has been quite extraordinary. And she has used the law in order to remind us of the importance of Parliament when it comes to decision making. The cabinet, the government, the ministers, that's all called the executive. One of my sisters once said, what is the executive? It's the ministers, the folk who do the sort of, run the departments and who are in the cabinet and their teams below them. The executive can't be left to make certain decisions if they're going to be involving taking away people's rights. That should be a matter for Parliament. And so Gina Miller was depicted as being the person who was, going against Brexit. She was actually going for Parliament making the important decisions that affect the rights of citizens up and down a country. And that was what she campaigned for and what she did in taking the government to court on the lawfulness of taking us out of Europe without making the decision a decision for Parliament. And so I'm welcoming you to a really skillful campaigner, a woman who understands why democracy matters and how campaigning can create change. Please welcome Gina Miller. Now I'm going to come and sit beside you, and we'll have a great discussion about whether the law is indeed an ass. I just wanted to remind everybody that today, this morning, the news really was covering the fact that a report has come from the Inspector of Police to talk about the policing failure around the policing of violence against women and girls. And it really is a scandal, and the report really is a scandal, and if you can, have a look at the reporting of this, because it's about the failure of police and the variability as between the different police forces in different regions in their response to violence against women, from the lesser violence through and the stuff that actually leads on to worsening violence, but the stuff that creates fear for women as we go about our lives. And then all the way through to the very serious forms of violence experienced with women, from domestic violence to homicide, and the terrible impact of that in losing the confidence of women in the legal system. So we're having this conversation against that backdrop, and it's a really interesting time for us to be having it. But of course, it's not just women and girls who feel concerned about law's failure and about policing failure, but also people from minority communities, people of colour, and also lots of working class communities have been disappointed in policing responses. But I'm going to turn first of all to you, Figen, because you experienced the sort of thing that most of us as parents fear most in our lives is the business of losing a child. And your son was killed in the arena bombing. Mm-hmm. You've been at the forefront, and I've watched you on television, and you've been quite amazing and brave and courageous, and you've given voice to what has been a concern of all of the parents who were involved and who lost people, or other people losing family members, about the fact that the security somehow wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you'd like to tell the audience a bit about your journey from being someone who'd never been in the public domain, but who actually moved into the public domain and has become an important figure for changing the law.
Yeah, actually I was very much in the background because I was a psychotherapist working self-employed in my basement, and I was happy there, and I was a real big introvert, and now I'm no longer an introvert. But when Martyn died, obviously we were grief-stricken, and about 18 months after it was the first time we ventured into Manchester to go to a small music concert. And I remember getting ready and saying to my husband, I'll take my smallest handbag. It'll make the bag search so much easier. And we got there, and they didn't even want to see our tickets. We walked straight in and straight to our seats. And it shocked me to the core. And that was early December. I chewed over it over Christmas and New Year. And I was still upset, and I thought, you need to do something. So I started a petition to bring security in, because in the meantime I researched it, and what I realized is that actually security at any venue is actually only a recommendation. The general public don't know that. You know, we see people in high-vis jackets and think they are security, but actually they may not be, they may be not trained at all or minimally trained. There's absolutely no legislation about it at all at the moment. So you go into big arenas and stadiums, etc., and the security is only as good as the provider of the venue is actually prepared to offer. So it really shocked me, and that can't be right when there are laws about how hot the food has to be in a canteen, how many toilets a venue has to have, yet there is no legislation on security. So, you know, and of course, unfortunately, terrorists know that, and any public venue can be a target. The other issue is, of course, in 2014, the terrorism attack methodology changed, and that was the start of lone actors who get radicalized at home in their bedroom and then go and do the act, and they can be anywhere, anytime, any place. So, and that's why I feel the law is really, really important. So currently the situation with Martyn's law is that I have been speaking to Priti Patel, I've been speaking to the security minister, and had many, many discussions with their team. And at the moment, it's going through the public consultation has just finished, which is something that the law requires to be done. And I don't think that's true, actually. It's not. It's recommended. And they're just evaluating it. And hopefully in the new year, the legislation will come in, and it will not be called Martyn's Law. It will be coming under the government's counter-terrorism strategy called Contest. And that has 4 strands, and it'll come under the Protect duty.
So you've succeeded in doing something that you can actually proudly claim was as a result of your campaigning, which is a change to the law which will make it compulsory for places to provide real, genuine security. Well, I mean, honestly, I hope that you feel great about it, because it really is an amazing achievement. I just want to say to you, it's a really fantastic thing to have done. But what it's telling us, and here we are doing a conference which is about ripples of hope, about how, you know, starting a campaign can actually mean changing law, which can save lives, and that each of us can be involved in doing that. And I'm just sorry that it was the pain of such terrible loss that took you on that journey.
Yeah, well, at least it brings some meaning to his death, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really great thing. It'll be called Martyn's Law.
Thank you.
I suspect that many people will call it Martyn's Law anyway. Gina, I mean, you've been involved in campaigns which are about making the law work. I mean, you really have. Because part of our constitutional arrangements are that it's Parliament, we live in a parliamentary democracy, and you campaigned because you felt that Parliament was being bypassed when it came to something very serious, which was, do we remain in Europe or not? And that essentially involved issues to do with rights, because there were rights that were involved in that process, the rights that people had by virtue of being part of the European Union. Tell us a bit about your journey in doing that.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to Figen, being a mother. I mean, I think what you've done is, and are doing, is absolutely extraordinary.
Thank you.
Well, my campaigning, funny enough, started with, I'll tell sort of a bit of a backstory. So I've been a campaigner actually for 30 years. I sort of accidentally appeared on front of newspapers, I think, because they just didn't like that particular campaign. But mine started with my daughter, who's now 33, and at the time was born with special needs. But what I find extraordinary is how many women and campaigners I know who, because of their personal experiences or tragedies, are able to influence the law for the greater good. And mine was to have statements established in the 1996 Special Education Act, because to my mind it was completely inhumane that every mother and parent couldn't have special provision for their child. It was only for those who had money and could afford specialists and consultants and doctors who actually had that privilege at that time. So mine was very much driven from my own family and my own passion to look after my child. So I always say that, you know, the lioness in me awoke the legal campaigner in me. But I think, you know, if we go back to our topic of the law being an ass, it is interesting because if you compare it to an ass, you know, the burden of beast, what is it the law that's carrying? And I think the law is actually about how we live our lives. It's how we're protected, what we're allowed to do, what others are allowed to do to us. But it's also, that's the positive, but I think the negative is it's about power and about privilege, and it's about protection. And that's where I think we really need to be alert as campaigners, and that's what I was alert at the time of Brexit, was that it was very easy to be distracted by the political agenda. But what was happening under cover of Brexit, and I have to say under cover of COVID, is that our rights are being removed. We're campaigners for hundreds of years who have given us rights where we are now. What's happening under both of those, and I think it started with Brexit, and it was an ideological, political direction of travel, where what we're doing is we're actually taking away rights. And to me, that's wrong. And we have to fight to protect those. And that's where I think the law is not just about what's written in books or on statutes. It's about us protecting our lives and understanding that we have an active role to play in a society based on the rule of law. And those who don't want to see the rule of law will obviously try and destroy that. But we have an enormous amount of power. What worries me is where we go now, because you talked about the report this morning, which is interesting, because one of the other things I've been campaigning for 16 years around domestic violence.
I know that you've done...
Well, I'm a survivor, so, you know, the statistics in this morning's report about every 3 days a woman gets killed, that statistic has been in every report for the last 10 years. And actually, the report, the statistic about 1.6% of rape victims only going to court, that's actually halved. So this idea that we didn't know what was going on, it's absolutely absurd. It's just that the law is the infrastructure of the law, the courts. We have never invested in justice and the law in this country. You know, now eight justice secretaries in 10 years just proves how little governments and politicians now put and value the law, and yet it's a vital part of the way we live our society operates. So I think we have to be better at protecting the law and the rule of law and our courts. And we've underinvested for so many years. We've closed half our courts in the last 10 years. We don't value it, and so people's lives are suffering.
Well, one of the extraordinary things was that when Chris Grayling was the Justice Minister and the austerity policies were brought in after the economic crash, he actually volunteered to take the biggest cut of any government department. 40% was taken out of justice, 40%. Now, you've got to think of that. That's almost slashing half the budget out of it. And so it meant absolutely undermining totally legal aid and a terrible assault on legal aid for ordinary people to have access to justice, and a terrible assault upon, you know, they closed down courts everywhere. So poor people have to travel long distances at great cost in order to get to even have access to courts, and to be present when members of their family are appearing before courts, and all of those things. And yet we're building more and more prisons, and there's a new policy for building more prisons. So justice, you see just now, it's announced yesterday, a review of the cabinet, and it's considered a demotion for somebody to be becoming the Lord Chancellor, Justice Minister. It just tells you the state of the nation. So I just wanted to take this business up about one of the things that both of you have been involved in is campaigning to change law. And one of the things that the audience, I'm sure, will want to know is, isn't that daunting?
Yeah, to say the least. It's very daunting. In particular, when I ran my campaign before it even got to in front of the minister, my campaign very slowly, because it ran for 6 months, that's the deadline, and it slowly crept up to 23,000 signatures, and it took 6 months to get to that stage. Alongside it, I had 2 other campaigns running that overtook me in a flash to hundreds of thousands signatures each. One of them was Bring Back Jeremy Kyle. The other one was Bring Back Plastic Straws for McDonald's. That's what I was competing with. So
Bring back plastic straws.
Yes.
Yeah.
And here was I trying to get security for the public.
To prevent bombings and
Yeah.
the like. There is a thing, which is that, of course, politicians respond to campaigns. The more that you can get something into the public domain, there is no doubt that it can get traction then with politicians who see it as being, somehow picking up something with the general public's concerns. And we've been seeing that around, I think, aspects of the internet, particularly with relation to children, the availability of porn, the fact that it was designed without children in mind, and it's one of those we were saying earlier outside of this. Platform, that it is one of those issues where there's now a recognition that the public are demanding something to be done with regard to children and the internet.
Yes, but I think it's very dangerous because what you end up with is poor law, because it's actually law being led by polling. Politics is being led by polling. But I've been involved in campaign. One of my campaigns has been on online safety, online harms bill, and I've been doing this for 6 years. And the draft legislation that's come through, all of a sudden football associations are now talking about the abuse they get. Actually, we've been trying to push anonymity and get legislation in there for misogyny, anonymity. It's the only bit of draft legislation that I can think of where children and adults are going to be treated the same. It is extraordinary, but it's suddenly the lobbying that's going on in this act. And what is so dangerous is that because of the publicity that it's now garnered, and it's now seen as a public win, that an unintended consequence could be of this act. There's so many, but one could be is that we are creating an oligopoly where actually the big providers are going to decide what is democratic, what is free speech, what is allowed for a child to see. This is very dangerous what we're doing, and because, in my view, it's poor law being rushed through because it's popular. And that's not what law should be. The writing of statutes and legislation, if it's going to affect every day of all of our lives, this has to be done by people who actually see the long-term effects of the law, but also the law is not static, and it's got to be amended and reformed against the backdrop of the contemporary issues we face as a society, which I think when you look at the discrimination, the cultural discrimination written into so much law, is because it was mainly written by men about 100 years ago, which is, you look at the way women are treated, how ethnic minorities are treated, how the penal system is treated. We haven't updated enough of our laws to reflect the way we live society now. So, the law is alive. It's not something, my father, who was an Attorney General, told me this from when I was about, 6, 7 years old. The law does not live in books. It's not words on a page in a legal text. It's how we live our lives. And that's why I think, for me, it's exciting. One of the things I think is really positive is that there are more and more young people applying to do law from very varied backgrounds. A lot of women are looking to come into the law.
Lots, more than half the law school.
I think it's extraordinarily positive.
Are women, yeah.
At a time where around the world, not just in the UK, we're seeing the rise of autocratic governments around the world who are seeking to roll back our rights, especially women's rights. And so I think it's extremely exciting, and I hope they all grow up to be activist lawyers.
If I have anything to do with it, Gina, they certainly will.
They will. I mean, they should be. And I think it's a really important time for people to enter the law, because I think the law is going to become more important in the next couple of decades than it has been for a long time.
But it is that thing of understanding that law is, of course, also reflects power relations. And those who got to make the law inevitably were those who had power, and of course it was therefore, as you've described, in the hands of a particular class of men. And increasingly, the demand for there to be the presence of a much varied and diverse and inclusive set of people in the judiciary and in the law and in the practice of law makes a huge difference, undoubtedly. But it is about those who deliver. And so I want to go back to that business I started off with, which is that we have a problem which is often about those unconscious things that find their ways into the delivery of law, attitudes towards women and so on, attitudes towards ethnic minorities, stereotyping, assumptions about people in relation to criminality or whatever. And so those things can disfigure true, real justice, and it's that business of law and justice about trying to make them merge together. But I wanted to ask you about, you've just been talking about the business of safety. Mm-hmm. When you say that it's going to be introduced into legislation, have people engaged with you about your role that you could play in that?
Yes, they have. I think that's partly because I've made it very clear in my meeting in the Home Office, in the Security Minister's office. I was offered the last word in the meeting. So I said, well, as you can see, I'm only 5 foot small. But I said, have you ever heard the expression that if you think small is not effective, you have never been in bed with a mosquito? So I said, and I'm going to be that mosquito. I'm going to be that irritating mosquito buzzing around your head. And I tell you what, I'm not going to go away. So I'm actually making myself a nuisance on purpose on Twitter. And I'm constantly on Twitter, constantly tweeting. We've just had a brand new security minister. He's not following me yet on Twitter, and I think that's outrageous, so I'm putting pressure on. And it's that actually, I'm not a legal person. I haven't studied law. But I can put pressure on publicly and shame people into action. So keeping the pressure up is something that's really important, and it works.
Listen, there'll be people around him, even if he's not looking at your Twitter account, there'll be people around him who will be, and they'll soon let him know that you're going to sting him if he doesn't deliver.
But they are involving me.
They are.
His office are actually updating me every now and then about the consultation, and they're giving me sort of rough ideas of timings. So, yeah, I feel like I'm involved. And if they don't, then I email the department and say, hey, I haven't heard from you guys. Can somebody ring me, please? And I get a phone call.
That's great.
So that's
really good to know. You've obviously, I'm telling you, you have obviously hit a pulse, because it doesn't happen. There's an awful lot of not lifting the phone and not responding. So that's wonderful. That's really great.
It's being a mosquito.
Continue. You've got to keep there. And I think that's what all of us have to learn. We've all got to become mosquitoes that actually, in following through on the things the changes we want to see. Gina, I wanted to go back to the business of what happened to you as a result of seeking to create a sort of, if you like, a parliamentary decision-making process, and how you took that to court. And I want to just deal with what you experienced online in relation to that. And then I was going to ask if Figen had did anything negative at all. I mean, you received a lot of bad stuff as a result of being a campaigner. Perhaps you can tell the audience a bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you the positives from it. So I think it's the first time ever I created precedent, again, in that somebody started a closed Facebook group to have me killed. And that's the first time a Viscount, he was actually a Viscount, actually got sent. So the first time the CPS had actually prosecuted someone and created new law for someone to go to be. He didn't get much, but I have to say, for a Viscount, 6 weeks in Brixton prison was probably
might have been quite an experience.
Exactly. So that happened, and then, sort of along the lines of the online harms, then somebody on a GoFundMe page put up for 5 months to raise £10,000 to hire a hitman to kill me. And again, that went totally, there was nothing, we couldn't take it down, there was no law in place, GoFundMe there was absolutely nothing we could do. They found the individual, of course they knew. Every fundraising page is linked to a bank account, of course they know who it is. But there was no law that we could, and we're working on that. It's not on the online bill, but again, he got prosecuted, and I got £200 for my distress. But apart from that, I've had a torrent, I've had letters, I've had threats. I was looked after by a terrorist squad for 2 years. My children were nearly taken. I've been through a lot for 4 years. And every time they've sent it to me, it's made me more powerful. Because every single time someone's tried to silence me, I've just said, sorry, but I'm just going to carry on just to make sure your voice is not bigger than mine. So I've actually learned to use the hate in a different way, to sort of you redirect it to that thing, redirect your energies. But it's also did something that I didn't realize, and I have to say, naive or privileged or didn't know. There are lots of views that I thought were on the margins of our society, and I didn't realize how mainstream they were. And being, a woman of color, the 3 main ones for me, and still are, and which is why I'm going to carry on fighting with every ounce of energy that I've got, is this idea that as a woman of color wasn't my place to speak up on part of Parliament. I should have known my place. The second one is that I couldn't have been clever enough, that it must have been powerful, clever white men behind me telling me what to say and what to do. And the other thing is it couldn't be my money. So there were lots of fake stories about who was funding me, George Soros, whoever it was. They couldn't understand that it could possibly be my money. So those 3 things together made me think, so, what does that say about society, or, too many people who have that view about what my place should be? And then in turn, what about women's places? What about my daughter's place in society? So I'm not going away anytime soon. And I think that hatred, so what I've done in the meantime for the last sort of 18 months through COVID is I've deliberately spent my time speaking to those people who don't agree with me. So I've met a couple of my trolls. I did BBC documentary. I'm now deliberately going and speaking to those people who don't agree with me and feel that that by hurting me, they're somehow getting rid of their hurt, because it's the old saying, hurt people hurt. I do believe that. So I want to build bridges, and I think I have the strength in me to be able to do that to other people who may feel that anger is the only solution. But it's how do you deal with it? And I think one of the things I say to lots of, especially I speak at a lot of schools for young people wanting to become campaigners and activists, and I say, do some work on yourself first, because you just have to accept that people are not going to agree with you. If you decide to raise your voice, you are going to encounter hate, and you are going to encounter people who are going to try and silence you. But that's just part of what you've decided to do, an arena you've decided to go into. So you need to make sure you have the armory around you to keep yourself safe as you go into that battle. And it comes with it. It's just part of the course. If people didn't disagree with you, you wouldn't be doing a good job.
Yeah, in some ways that's a measure. But it is shocking, because one of the things that's happened with social media is that it has given a megaphone, if you like, to so many more people than you might have encountered in the past, and therefore
I say that sometimes there might have been a few people sitting at the end of a pub or in a room in their now I found out. So, for example, the troll I met to the BBC, I have to say it was shocking, because he was selling, I presume, these closed books. He was another one they were all discussing how to kill me. And I thought, in the documentary I say that I thought 300 or 400 people, and he said, no, it was over 20,000. And closed groups are actually not in this bill. So this is the sort of thing, there's so many gaps in this legislation. There are silent places, and it's not just about harm and me, it's about what's happening to our young people. There's an epidemic of mental health and self-harming, and or what's happening in these closed secret gaming rooms, and none of this is in legislation.
Well, we'll have to talk about that later. But I wanted to ask you, Figen, did you? I mean, you had suffered a terrible loss. Did you have any negative stuff that you had to deal with?
Of course I did. Yeah, I got trolled. It was the 1975 who produced a video of Martyn, forgot his surname. Anyway, the lead singer had a suicide vest and pressed the detonator, and flowers and butterflies came out. And they're a Manchester band, and to bring that out, so I was vocal on Twitter. Oh my God, the fans of that band, they slated me the whole week, so much so that I got a phone call of somebody from London, from the Home Office and the Peace Foundation in Warrington. They all were concerned about my state of being because of all the negative tweets. But you know what? I just mainly ignore it now. I've had to develop a thick skin. I was accused of looking too happy as a bereaved mother. I was smiling too much. There's all sorts of stuff I got, but I just ignore it now. I will not. I'm not prepared to enter into negativity. For me, I think sometimes campaigning can be a lonely place.
Yes.
And I found, as I was listening to you, I have slightly a different issue. I'm the mother of one person, but alongside Martyn, there were 21 other victims who died. And as far as I know, I'm the only person who's campaigning for something very vocally, very frequently. So I'm often in the media. And for me, there's always this massive fear of upsetting the other families, that I'm always frightened that they may think, oh, Martyn is displayed as the most important victim because his face is always there. And it's really an effort to bypass that emotionally for me, because I need to stay focused on, but I need to change this law. This law has to come in. That has to be priority, even if people may not like me as a result of that. It's always a fear of mine. It may be unrealistic, I don't know, but it is a fear because I'm trying to be kind to people. I don't want to upset people, but so it feels a lonely place sometimes, but focus is important.
It can be a really lonely place, and I think your family becomes so important.
Yeah.
I mean, they're the only ones who keep me going some days.
Yeah.
No, I want us to sort of turn it around, because that's the downside, and we have to prepare people who are all thinking about campaigning and are themselves already involved in campaigns and the like. And we know that women who put their heads above the parapet actually are particularly targeted. Is somehow there's something about the vocal woman that arouses particular animosity from certain quarters, and I think it's probably rooted in misogyny. But I want to ask you about something hopeful, and why campaigning has been fulfilling for you, because I want people out there to feel, actually, although there are inevitably going to be some of the hurtful stuff, there's some of that bad stuff, that in there's also the sense that actually you might create change.
Absolutely. Despite all the negative and the trolling, and it doesn't really matter how bad things are negatively. It's absolutely worth it, because in my case, it means the security industry are going to increase their training of security people. It's going to standardize the security industry. The security industry's reputation will go away from the stereotypical bald-headed men with tattoos at nightclub doors.
Yes.
That image is going to go gradually through this law. The law is going to bring legislation into the boardroom similar to health and safety. So once CEOs are going to be made liable if a terrorist attack happens and people get killed or injured, they will take it serious. They have to, because they could be fined or go to prison. So the legislation is absolutely worth fighting for. So all the negatives are cancelled out for me.
You've brought to mind the fact that I was once doing a big case involving national security. and for particular reasons, we were challenging from the jury anybody who was in MI5 or MI6. And so we asked the judge to ask the jury panel. We're not allowed, as in the United States, to individually question jurors, but to ask the jury panel if there was anybody who would like to come forward and speak to the judge and say if they had anybody in the security services. And that was how he asked the question. And an elderly woman with a shopping bag stepped forward, went up, and she whispered in the judge's ear. And he turned around and he said, "No, I don't think it's going to matter that your son is a security man at the Adelphi nightclub. I think that'll be fine," because she hadn't quite understood that we weren't talking about that kind of security man. But it is that thing that if you can make the change, then that is the way in which you can deal with the bad stuff. What about you, Gina? What do you feel about? I mean, how are your spirits still maintained about campaigning?
Because you're not doing it for yourself. I mean, that's the main thing. You're actually doing it for other people and to help. I mean, and I do meet campaigners who are doing it for themselves. Don't let me. That's the other thing. It can be a lonely place. It can actually be quite an aggressive place too, depending on what you're campaigning on. And that sometimes I don't need to be at the front. Sometimes I could just connect people. Sometimes, because I've been doing it for 30 years, so sometimes I can just write things. I mean, it depends on the campaign, where I'm most useful. But it can be a competitive place, and I think you just have to, again, try and work your way out. And you learn. I think the most exciting thing, I'd say, from the audience point of view is actually learn to get better at it. You do learn, which is fantastic, and you get better. But there's nothing more satisfying than actually achieving change. And just sitting back in my quiet moments, I try and have quiet moments quite a lot, where I just think about why I'm doing what I'm doing, what's achieving, and how it's helping other people, and before I move on to the other one. Because sometimes it's overwhelming. I think you'd agree. Sometimes when you're trying to create change, you're trying to bring on something, you say, taking on meeting ministers and taking on a government, whatever it is, it can be overwhelming, and you think, I'm just me, where do I start, whatever. But I think what drives you is your passion for that, because you want to just help. You just want to do something. And it's as simple as that, actually.
This conference is of course called Ripples of Hope, and it was drawing on Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, speaking about the way in which each of us can be making a contribution, and it might in itself, be a small ripple, but actually coming together with what happens in the efforts to make change, that we can all make a huge contribution. If there were other things that could be done to change this environment in which we want to have better law, what would you think of? What would make the change? What do you think, Figen? How would it have been easier for you in the beginning to have drawn this to the attention of government? Can you think of anything?
I needed people to come on board to help me. And that's really sad that it had to come to that. On my own, I wasn't taken as serious. It was only when
there was momentum.
When people like Brendan Cox came on board, whose wife was killed by a terrorist, and it gained more power. It's very difficult to do it all by yourself if you're just a layperson, which I was at the time. I am now far more knowledgeable about a lot of things, but at the time I wasn't. So I just knew at the time I want change and I need to make this happen somehow. And somehow it's materialized, but it was a hard journey. I wish it was easier.
Well, I mean, what you're saying from that is that those who have some experience in campaigning should, if they see someone like you stepping forward, offer to help and come and say, can we kind of give you advice about how this might be done and what you might do, and sort of make themselves available. I know that you do that anyway, Gina Miller, but that's your sort of call out for this.
Yeah, that's been my learning.
That it helped you to have Brendan Cox, whose wife was, of course, cruelly murdered. She was a member of Parliament, and so to have had that support and help and sort of a bit of steerage from somebody to help about campaigning, it really matters. Gina, what do you feel? What would you want? What change would you want to see that would make it easier for people who are wanting change in law to actually?
I would like to see, just from a legal profession point of view, more of a pro bonoing as we do in the US. I think that, you know, the more hours sort of per month, I think the idea of, and the thing is, we get it in human rights law, but family law, contract law, there's so many other areas of law that actually need to step up and provide more pro bono hours. I think that's really important. The other thing, I think there is a problem with diversity and a number of women who are in senior positions in law. I think the law has a long way to go.
Sure.
When it comes to diversity and really reflecting our modern society. But I think from the point of view of campaigners and human rights, and I'd actually like to see, and I know it was discussed in this conference, but I would like to see an investigation of how we can introduce more into our curriculum where young people start learning about rights, about how government works, about how systems work. I think it's quite extraordinary that even when I speak to universities, even first-year law students actually don't understand how policy is made. And I have to explain that politics is policies, but policy is about people. And if you make that connection and realize what the impact of them is, so I think we need to do more education on our infrastructure of government and legislation and the rule of law from an earlier age, because it's something, then I think that will elevate the importance of it as well. So knowledge doesn't just inform, it gives people, it suddenly gives it weight and presence and importance. And I think it's slipping down the agenda. So those are ways I think it's being brought back up to the agenda, because, you know, we need to know our rights. We need to know what we're allowed and not allowed to. We need to know that you actually can just turn up at your MP surgery if you've got a campaign, that they are a public servant and that they have no right to ignore your calls or your emails. And when they say, don't email me, don't turn up, you say, well, actually, I pay you with my taxes, so you're going to answer my question. But I think a lot more giving people education that really gives us confidence to use our voice is something very important.
Well, I mean, of course, that's what the Robert Kennedy Foundation is really all about, is about, I mean, not only doing, you know, work like taking cases on major issues and in doing that around the world, but also getting into schools and doing education programs in schools about rights and about human rights. And I think that it's now a good moment to go to the audience, because if the lights could come up a bit, then I'll see people's hands, and then people who've got microphones can take the microphone to people. Who would like to ask a question of either of my panelists or even to me about the whole business of law and how we can get change, and anything that you would like to see changed about law? Well, there's a gentleman with his hand up over there, back there.
Is it working? Oh, right.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get to the roots of things, but when you think about the roots, it's quite easy, because we all eat, and we don't fly, we don't float, we use the land, we use the water. Who owns it? What insignia is placed on the land that we all are reliant on? The crown. So how can an entity, an organisation, which hasn't had any constitutional backing or even any semblance of transparency and openness, how can we go into those institutions of law citing laws with that insignia and emblem on it? It seems like a conflict of interest to me. And
that's a big question. I mean,
yeah,
you're really talking.
It's a very fundamental question, and when we don't get to that, there's no trust. There just can't be any trust. I don't see for me. It's
Okay.
too hard.
I mean, really what you're raising is the fact that different countries have their different traditions, and our constitutional arrangements, of course, are unwritten. And so we're talking about the way in which our nation has evolved. When you say who owns the land, Well, you know, there are whole tracts of it that you're right that are owned by the Crown. But there are lots of people who think that they've got their own little plot in their purchasing of a freehold, and that they do own their own little bit. But for many people, it's not what matters. You know, it's having a roof over your head and having shelter and so on. And one of the things about human rights is about the fact that we are not respecting some of those human rights, which actually do see that as fundamental to people being able to live a decent, fulfilled life. But listen, I'm sorry, I'm going to take this around the thing before I ask my colleagues to think about some of the questions, and then I'll get them to deal with it. There's a hand up here, and there's another woman here in the front row.
Hi, thanks very much for today. My name's Lisa Dryborough, and one of the things that I am aware of in Figen's work, hi Figen, is your approach to peaceful conflict resolution. And I also heard you talk about meeting your trolls, trying to come face to face with the abusers. And I'd just like to hear a little bit more about, you know, the peaceful way to resolving anger, as opposed to the, you know, you can do anger with peace, or you can do anger with an anger with kindness, or anger with hatred and cruelty. So I'm just wondering a little bit more about that process, and whether we could learn something from the great peacemakers of the world who've channeled their anger into protest and actually made change.
Hold that thing. Pass the microphone, if you wouldn't mind, to the young woman in the row in front, and then we'll take it up and we'll have a little chat on the platform.
Hi, yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on maybe how we'd bridge the gap, or if there needs to be greater focus on the gap between kind of what the law says and actually what happens in practice, because I think there can be a lot of focus on writing the right law, but then the rights that are protected within that law don't necessarily get enacted in practice. A little bit of context, I research on choice in childbirth, and so we have the absolute right to refuse medical treatment, but often that gets swept under the rug when there is a pregnant person who's trying to refuse something. And so I just wondered if you had any thoughts on going beyond just writing good law, but actually making sure that law is enacted appropriately.
Okay, and I see the hand of a colleague of mine from the law. She's got her hand up there. Sally, please. No, she's got her hand up there, look. The microphone's coming up to you, Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally. I'm a barrister, 20 years. Thank you for a great, great panel. My question is about how can we engage more men and boys in activism and campaigning? And do you think there's a gender dynamic?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to take those questions one by one. I mean, one of them, our male colleague asking the question about the insignia around which all of this is done, and there's a sense in which it's always about the crown. You know, prosecutions are brought. You know, the crown takes the case. You know, it's the Queen versus John Brown. You know, if he commits a crime, whereas for example, in the United States, there's the people versus. I have to tell you that and I don't pretend great knowledge about the American system, but enough knowledge to say that I don't think it makes very much difference who it is that's being said that's bringing it. I think that there are failings on both sides of the Atlantic, and whether it's the Queen that whose insignia is bringing a prosecution, or the people as it is notional in the United States, I'm not sure that it makes that much difference. But do any of you think that it does, that it somehow feels that we're still weighed down by this business of, you know, our constitutional arrangements with a figurehead who is you know, royalty? Does it seem to make any difference as far as you're concerned?
Because I'm not a legal person, I have no idea. But personally,
It doesn't
it doesn't
figure.
seem to.
Yeah.
I think the Americans have also got issues in their legal system.
What do you think? Jim?
I think there is an issue with not having a written constitution. Particularly, I think there are merits. I mean, we're only one of 3 countries in the entire world that doesn't have a written constitution, which says quite a lot. But I think for me, I would like to see something in the middle, actually. I'd like to see a sort of partially written constitution, which is about keeping politicians and power in check, because I don't think we have that. And that's where I have a problem with the tradition of the law, because, you know, we still have the procedures of Parliament being conducted against the backdrop of a book that was written by a junior clerk, Erskine May, in 1874, which is ridiculous. You know, we don't have any accountability. You know, one talks, you know, look what we've had in the last, you know, COVID has exposed this so much that, you know, so you get courts who rule that a contract shouldn't have been given, and the MP gets a slap on the hand, but the ultimate arbitrator of if they get sacked is the Prime Minister. I mean, that's why nothing happens. So you've got all these court cases that are being brought. It's costing us all loads of taxpayers' money, and nobody ever gets sacked, nobody gets ever fined, nobody ever goes to prison, because we have no constitutional arrangement.
This is about the business of giving contracts to your pals.
It is ridiculous.
For,
well, there's nothing. You can lie, you can do all it. So to me, the constitutional arrangement I'd like to see is the constitutional legislation that keeps power in check and make sure that our money is not being wasted and that there is no corruption. So that's what I'd like to see. But I think, apart from that, I think a flexible system actually works quite well. But I'm more worried about the fact of the contradictory in the law, because I think what we sometimes do is we bring in new laws without actually looking at how it conflicts with existing law. And I'll give you an example with COP26 coming up. So COP26, this whole idea that what we're going to do is get every business every government, every business to sign up to net zero. Actually, there are about 15 companies who are going to launch a law case, a suit against governments. And there's precedent in this, because in Pakistan, a copper company who were closed down because of its environmental damage actually got $6 billion in compensation against the Pakistani government. So you're now going to have all these governments saying this because we forgot to do the other law, where they have a right to make profit and to make, you know, as much profit as possible. So what we needed to have done was repeal that one before you bring in the new one. So it's those sort of contradictions that don't make any sense to me. So we do have to update and look at what, you know, how is the law connected? What are the consequences? Because the law can actually give loopholes for bad actors as well as good actors.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
so that's where I think the law is an ass in that respect.
But there is something in that, which is about wanting certain kinds of things, you know, written, because having something written down does make a difference. But at the same time, one can see from the United States the inflexibility, where you end up having people who insist on the original text being applied, and then you're lumbered with the business of the right to bear arms, and those, you know, those judges on the Supreme Court who end up being, you know, literalists when it comes to the original constitutional text, and you can't get away from it. So that flexibility is something that is actually attractive in our system.
Yeah,
some of it.
I think it does need update, but that's what I'm saying. I'd keep it very narrow to the politicians. But I mean, there's also a misunderstanding. The law can sometimes be used as or publicized in a way that's incorrect. Because again, back in '96, I've been talking about responsible capitalism since then, and I tried to bring in, and all the way along, I kept being told that, you know, maximizing profit is actually the law. It's not the law.
No, of course it's not the law.
You just say that.
Yeah.
But the amount of people who say it to me, it's the law. I say, where?
It was invented in the business
It was
schools.
school, yeah, it's
yeah,
not
of
a law.
course. I want to just pick up on the business, because we're running out of time, about mediation. Is there a better way of some of these some conflicts being resolved, that rather than the adversarial system? And there is a sort of push towards mediation. Sometimes that has to be said to save money, because, you know, because it's and I have seen situations in which when mediation is brought in, for example, in relation to matrimonial matters, women can be disadvantaged. You know, they can be outspun by the other side. So you've got to be very careful that there is real, genuine equality of arms, and that the mediation is taking place in a way that doesn't disadvantage the less powerful partner in the process. So, but there is something in this, which is that I do believe that sometimes, and I know as an international lawyer dealing with things like what happened to the women in the Congo, the mass rapes, that there's not going to be individual justice, and that truth and truth, and it's not about reconciliation there, it's about truth and justice. It's about being able to have the account of what took place archived, the women having a day of telling what was done to them, even if there will not be the individual who did it ending up suffering the consequences. Having some way in which responsibility is taken for what happened, and a nation having it on record that those women suffered. So I'm a firm believer in this. But I just wanted to take the final question, which was about, and you've mentioned this, about how do we get the law to really deliver. And I think this is back to the business of your thing about diversity and changing the nature of those who make the decisions, and overcoming some of the stuff which is about the homogeneity of our those who deliver law and create law.
I think it's also about investing in the law and seeing it as a vital part of our society. You know, investing in rehabilitation in prison, not just building prisons, and understanding, going back to some of the basic questions: what is justice there for? What is the law there for? What is punishment there for? And getting back, because we made these things so complicated sometimes, but investing in it. And I do think a positive is actually going to be a use of technology in, for example, conflict resolution and contract law. I mean, there's some incredibly exciting projects being trialed, which means that the court times and the resolution, because, you know, the old saying, you know, justice delayed is justice denied. I mean, the average waiting time at the moment in courts, especially because of COVID, is extraordinary. I think most people are going to be denied justice, but there's so much. There is actually an awful lot to be done. So I think technology is a positive thing that will help more diversity, and I think we have to think about also not just entering the law, but actually going up in the law, because the problem of becoming a partner, it's very financially prohibitive for a lot of people from ethnic minorities and ordinary backgrounds to get up to progress through the law. So I think we have to have more mentoring as we get up the senior management in law, and we have to have far more female and ethnic minority judges. I mean, God, it is appalling in 2021. If you look at the profile of our judges.
We've got no person of minority on our Supreme Court.
No.
And we have one Sikh judge on the Court of Appeal, and it's a pretty poor story, I have to say, in the senior levels. And let me tell you, in the Ministry of Justice, self-identifying, the staffing of the Ministry of Justice is 86% white. Self-identifying in terms of racial terms in their own surveys, and 94% when it comes to the senior levels within the Ministry of Justice. So it's a shocking story.
But just my last thing, because I'm on my domestic violence thing, I think on that, you know, you have to start also breaking the status quo. This idea, can you think of any other crime where, you know, and I accept that until you're proven guilty and all the rest of it, but where the victim is the one who has to leave the house? I mean, I've just...
Going to a refuge, yeah.
You know, why is it that women and children have to leave the house? It doesn't make any sense. It's the only crime that happens. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we've got to think about these things quite differently.
Well, increasingly, I think that there is a move again that. But Figen, tell me, what would you like to see happening? Because I'm having to draw this to a conclusion, unfortunately.
Well, I'm encouraged that there's more women training. Mm. So whilst it's an issue at the moment, hopefully in a decade, the situation will be far, far better. There will be female judges, hopefully then.
Well, we just have to keep pushing at that door. Can I just say to all of you, I'm really great. I hope you'll join with me in thanking two fabulous women who are making the change and creating ripples of hope for us all.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for coming and being with us. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you all.